you ever wondered about which prisons are the most inhumane in the world in 2025? This video is for you. From North Korea's brutal political detention prison, where fingers are chopped off as punishment.
In the factory where I worked, as a result of breaking an object, a punishment really. As a punishment, my finger was cut off.
To the infamous Guantanamo Bay detention camp in Cuba, where human rights are thrown out the window and absolute brutality reigns.
They used to strip us all naked. Right in the beginning, they sliced all our clothes off and spat at us.
In this video, I will take you behind bars of the most inhumane prisons in the world, 2025. Let's start with the Black Beach Prison, Equatorial Guinea. On the volcanic island of Bioko in Malabo, Equatorial Guinea, stands a facility whose name alone sends shivers through those who know its reputation. Black Beach Prison, built during Spanish colonial rule in the 1940s, gained international notoriety following Equatorial Guinea's independence in 1968, particularly under the dictatorship of Francisco Macias Nguema. What makes Black Beach exceptionally brutal is not just its physical conditions, but its role as a political tool. The prison became infamous for systematically imprisoning and eliminating political opponents. Today, it continues to serve as a mechanism for controlling dissent. Daniel Janse van Rensburg, a South African businessman who was wrongfully detained at Black Beach for 429 days, describes the facility not as a conventional prison, but as something far more primitive.
This is not a normal prison. It's not a question that you separated and so on. The only people that are kept locked up in cells are political prisoners. The rest, it's virtually a cage. It's like a zoo. They open up the gate and you're thrown in there.
The physical conditions within Black Beach define extreme inhumanity. Built for approximately 120 people, the facility routinely houses over 400 inmates. Overcrowding creates an environment where privacy doesn't exist and violence is rampant. Van Rensburg describes the horrific living situation.
There's 11, 12-year-old boys in there. There's women and children. There's drug addicts, there's mentally disturbed people there, military prisoners, police prisoners. We all put in there together and we've got to survive.
The prison's approach to nutrition is disturbing. Van Rensburg explains how the prison administration's corruption directly impacts prisoners' food quality.
The warden has got a budget to feed the prison, but he's given it in cash. So, whatever he doesn't spend, he puts in his pocket. So he buys all the stale bread from the bakery that's not sold during the day. So the next day he buys all that stale bread. He goes to the catering companies that cater for the oil companies and he buys the expired meat from them, because he gets it for free virtually, because they can't feed it to the oil companies anymore.
Disease runs rampant in these conditions. According to Security Journal UK, Black Beach Prison ranks as the second most inhumane prison globally, a distinction that speaks volumes about its conditions. The U.S. Department of State's 2023 Human Rights Report on Equatorial Guinea noted credible reports of arbitrary killings, torture, and harsh prison conditions, with Black Beach being central to these abuses. And if you think Black Beach is worse, then you are not prepared for the notoriety of Camp 14, North Korea. North Korea's infamous political prison system remains one of the most secretive and brutal detention networks on Earth. Among these facilities, Camp 14, officially known as Kwan Lee So No. 14, stands out for its systematic implementation of torture, starvation, and collective punishment. Located in Kachon County, South Pyongan Province, Camp 14 operates as part of North Korea's broader system of political prison camps supervised by the National Security Agency. What makes this facility particularly horrific is its implementation of 3 generations of punishment, a policy where not just the accused but their entire families are imprisoned for perceived political crimes. Inside Camp 14, approximately 15,000 prisoners endure conditions designed to break both body and spirit. Inmates face severe malnutrition with minimal food rations, leading to widespread starvation. Hard labor is mandatory in dangerous conditions, such as mining and logging, with constant surveillance ensuring no escape. Medical care is virtually non-existent, resulting in extraordinarily high mortality rates among prisoners. The camp's brutality is perhaps best illustrated through the experience of Shin Dong-hyuk, the only person known to have been born in a North Korean political prison camp who successfully escaped. His harrowing testimony has shed light on the incomprehensible cruelty within Camp 14's walls.
In the factory where I worked, as a result of breaking an object, a punishment really. As a punishment, my finger was cut off. But I was just relieved that I wasn't publicly executed as a result of the incident, and as a child, I was just thankful That was it.
Perhaps most disturbing about Shin's story is how the camp system manipulated him into betraying his own family. When he learned of his mother and brother's plans to escape, he reported them to the guards, believing he would be rewarded. Instead, the guards tortured him brutally, suspecting his complicity in the escape plan.
Pain that I dealt with, being beaten while hanging upside down, being seared with fire, all of these experiences themselves, I thought it was only right because I was a prisoner and because my mum and brother had committed a crime.
The guards eventually gave up trying to get a confession out of Shin, and he was sent back to the camp where he witnessed the execution of his mother and brother.
Today, human rights organizations estimate that approximately 200,000 people remain detained in North Korea's prison camp system. Camp 14 stands as a chilling testament to how political repression can create environments where human rights cease to exist and where generations of families are condemned to lives of unrelenting suffering for alleged political crimes. But all these suffering is nothing compared to life behind the bars of Bang Kwang Central Prison, Thailand. In Thailand's Nonthaburi province, not far from the bustling streets of Bangkok, stands a facility known locally as the Big Tiger, a name that speaks to its predatory reputation. Bang Kwang Central Prison, often referred to as the Bangkok Hilton in Western media, has earned its place among the world's most inhumane detention facilities through decades of harsh treatment and appalling conditions. Built between 1927 and 1931, Bang Kwang serves as Thailand's central prison for death row and long-term inmates. What sets this facility apart is its systematic approach to dehumanization, beginning with its infamous leg iron policy. Until reforms in 2013, all new prisoners were required to wear leg irons for their first 3 months, while death row inmates had them permanently welded on. The prison's severe overcrowding creates conditions that violate basic human dignity. Designed to hold approximately 3,500 inmates, Bang Kwang regularly houses more than 7,000 prisoners, creating an environment where personal space becomes a luxury no one can afford. Life inside Bang Kwang's cells defies imagination, with temperatures regularly exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Celsius, and extreme humidity. The overcrowded cells become pressure cookers of human suffering. The mental health impact of these conditions is devastating. According to Thai officials, approximately 63% of Bang Kwang's inmates suffer from mental health problems, with 1 in 10 being suicidal. Bang Kwang's death row adds another dimension of psychological torture. Executions can be scheduled with little notice, leaving condemned prisoners in a perpetual state of uncertainty.
I have no clue when I will die. They could inject me today or tomorrow.
Disease spreads rapidly in the overcrowded conditions, with inadequate medical care amplifying the problem. Tuberculosis and HIV are prevalent, and the prison hospital lacks basic resources. Bang Kwang's harsh conditions have been repeatedly criticized by international human rights organizations, which have highlighted the prison's inhumane treatment of inmates. Despite some reforms in recent years, the facility continues to represent one of the most severe incarceration experiences in the world. Yet, when it comes to harsh living conditions, Bang Kwang is no match for Guantanamo Bay Detention Camp, Cuba. Located on the southeastern tip of Cuba, on land leased to the United States since 1903, stands a detention facility that has become synonymous with controversial detention practices and alleged human rights violations. The Guantanamo Bay Detention Camp, established in 2002 following the September 11th attacks, has operated as a facility for detaining those the U.S. government classifies as enemy combatants. What distinguishes Guantanamo from other detention facilities is its existence in a legal gray area, a space where normal judicial protections have often been suspended. Since its establishment, approximately 780 detainees have been held at the facility, many without formal charges or trials. The experiences of former detainees provide insight into the dehumanizing practices employed at the facility. From the moment of arrival, prisoners faced a systematic stripping of identity.
They used to strip us all naked. Right in the beginning, they sliced all our clothes off and spattered us and punched us and, degraded us in ways it's really hard to, even now, hard to describe. And that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to remove our sense of individualism, remove our sense of humanity, and give us each a number. And we'll remember our numbers to this day.
Reports from human rights organizations and former detainees describe a range of practices that would violate standard detention protocols, including sleep deprivation, exposure to temperature extremes, stress positions, and waterboarding. Many of these techniques fall under what the U.S. government termed enhanced interrogation methods. The psychological impact of indefinite detention has been particularly devastating for Guantanamo detainees. With no clear legal process and often no timeline for release, many detainees experience experienced severe mental health deterioration.
I had a panic attack once in my cell. So they sent a psychiatrist, and she sits opposite my cell and says to me, 558, which was my number, have you ever considered removing your trousers and threading them with your sheet and then using that to tie a noose around your neck and then tying it into the corner of the cell and jumping off? Have you ever considered that? I said, no, not until you put the thought in my mind.
The International Committee of the Red Cross warned in 2003 about the psychological damage being inflicted on detainees, while reports by multiple human rights organizations concluded that the treatment of detainees systematically violated international standards. Particularly controversial has been the practice of force feeding during hunger strikes. Medical ethics bodies have criticized these procedures, which reportedly involved inserting large feeding tubes without sedatives, often in the presence of physicians. During a 2013 hunger strike involving over 100 prisoners, 21 detainees were force-fed. Legal challenges to Guantanamo detention practices have reached the U.S. Supreme Court multiple times. In cases like Hamdan v. Rumsfeld, the court found that detainees had certain due process rights, though they remained subject to controversial military tribunals rather than civilian courts. Despite calls from the United Nations for closure as early as 2006 and campaign promises by multiple U.S. presidents, Guantanamo continues to operate, though with a significantly reduced population. Guantanamo's placement on this list reflects not only the reported conditions and practices within the facility, but also its symbolic significance as a place where detention occurred outside normal legal frameworks. You might think Guantanamo Bay is worse, but that's because you know nothing about Ciudad Barrios Prison, El Salvador. In the mountains of eastern El Salvador stands a facility that has become synonymous with gang control and extreme overcrowding. Ciudad Barrios Prison, established as part of the country's segregated prison system, was originally designed to house members of the notorious MS-13 gang away from their rivals. What emerged, however, was essentially a state-sanctioned gang headquarters where inmates, not guards, established the rules. According to Security Journal UK's 2025 rankings, Ciudad Barrios tops the list as the most dangerous prison in the world. The facility exemplifies how overcrowding and abdication of state control can create hellish conditions for those incarcerated. The most striking feature of Ciudad Barrios is its population density. Built for approximately 800 inmates, the prison routinely houses over 3,000 prisoners, creating conditions where prisoners struggle to find space to sleep or move. This extreme overcrowding has led to rampant disease, violence, and inhumane living conditions. Inside Ciudad Barrios, gang hierarchy replaced official authority for many years. MS-13 members effectively governed themselves, establishing their own rules, punishments, and economy within the prison walls. Guards rarely entered the general population areas, instead monitoring from secure towers around the perimeter. This changed dramatically with President Nayib Bukele's administration, which implemented a controversial state of emergency in 2022 aimed at breaking gang control. The crackdown has led to mass arrests and even more severe overcrowding in El Salvador's prison system, including Ciudad Barrios. While Ciudad Barrios previously operated with minimal oversight, allowing MS-13 members considerable freedom within its walls, Bukele's policies have imposed harsh new restrictions. These include 23-hour daily lockdowns, minimal amenities, and constant surveillance. What makes Ciudad Barrios particularly concerning is the combination of severe overcrowding and the recent shift to extreme punishment. Prisoners are packed 80 to a cell designed for far fewer, with minimal access to healthcare, nutrition, or basic hygiene. Disease is rampant, violence common, and rehabilitation practically non-existent. The psychological impact of these conditions is severe. Inmates face not only physical deprivation, but also the constant stress of violence and the uncertainty of indefinite detention. Many of those arrested under El Salvador's state of emergency have not been charged or tried, creating a situation of legal limbo. The Bukele administration has acknowledged that innocent people have been swept up in the crackdown. Under the state of emergency, law enforcement has arrested more than 81,000 people, giving El Salvador one of the world's highest incarceration rates. Ciudad Barrios stands as a symbol of this transformation, from a prison where gang members enjoyed relative freedom to a facility representing extreme punishment and control. However, while Ciudad Barrios Prison is famous for its extreme punishments, it is no match for this ancient Russian prison. Bhutka Prison, Russia. In the heart of Moscow stands a facility whose name has become synonymous with Russia's harsh penal system. Bhutka Prison, officially known as Butyrskaya Prison, dates back to the late 18th century and has housed political prisoners, dissidents, and common criminals throughout its long history. From Tsarist times through the Soviet era and into modern Russia, Butyrka has maintained a reputation for severe conditions and systematic mistreatment. What makes Butyrka particularly notorious is its extreme overcrowding combined with crumbling infrastructure and rampant disease. Cells designed for 10 inmates routinely hold up to 100 prisoners, creating conditions where prisoners must sleep in shifts due to lack of space. Personal space is non-existent, with inmates packed so tightly that movement becomes nearly impossible during lockdown periods. The prison's antiquated plumbing and ventilation systems contribute to unsanitary conditions that foster disease. Tuberculosis outbreaks are common, with inadequate medical care exacerbating the spread of this and other infectious diseases. The combination of overcrowding and poor ventilation creates an environment where contagion spread rapidly and with devastating effect. Butyrka gained international attention in 2009 with the death of Sergei Magnitsky, a lawyer who had been investigating government corruption. After being denied medical care for pancreatitis and other conditions, Magnitsky died in custody, sparking international outrage and eventually leading to the Magnitsky Act, which imposes sanctions on Russian officials involved in human rights abuses. Physical abuse and torture allegations have consistently followed Butyrka throughout its history. Prisoners report beatings by guards and forced confessions, with those who complain about conditions facing particular brutality. The prison's isolation rooms, known as punishment cells, represent an additional layer of suffering, with inmates confined in tiny spaces, with minimal light, inadequate food, and no contact with others. Psychological torture complements physical abuse at Butyrka. Sleep deprivation is common, with bright lights kept on 24 hours a day and guards conducting disruptive counts throughout the night. The mental health impact of these conditions is severe, with suicide attempts common among the population. Corruption permeates every aspect of life at Butyrka. Guards demand bribes for basic necessities, and a complex system of payoffs determines everything from cell assignments to medical attention. Those without money or outside support face the worst conditions, often deprived of adequate food, medical care, or protection from violence. The prison's historical significance adds another dimension to its notoriety. Throughout the Soviet era, Butyrka housed political prisoners and dissidents, including figures like Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who later documented the Soviet prison system in his work, The Gulag Archipelago. This legacy continues today, with critics of the government still finding themselves behind Butyrka's walls. For those incarcerated at Butyrka, survival depends on navigating a complex social hierarchy and paying for protection. Those without resources or connections face the greatest risk of violence, disease, and neglect. The combination of these factors, overcrowding, disease, abuse, and corruption, places Butyrka firmly among the world's most inhumane detention facilities. But when I thought Butyrka Prison is the most inhumane prison ever, this Philippines prison gave me a cause to worry. South Cotabato, Provincial Jail, Philippines. In the tropical heat of the Philippines stands a facility that embodies the crisis of overcrowding in the country's detention system. South Cotabato Provincial Jail, located on the southern island of Mindanao, represents how a pretrial detention center can transform into one of the world's most inhumane prisons when pushed far beyond capacity. The jail's most defining characteristic is its staggering population density. Designed for approximately 600 inmates, South Cotabato routinely houses over 2,000 prisoners, creating conditions where personal space becomes virtually non-existent. What makes South Kotabato particularly concerning is that the majority of its inmates have not been convicted of any crime. They are awaiting trial in a system plagued by delays and backlogs. The physical conditions inside the jail defy imagination. With average temperatures reaching 35 degrees Celsius, 95 degrees Fahrenheit, and extreme humidity, the overcrowded cells become pressure cookers of human suffering. Living quarters within South Kotabato exemplify extreme overcrowding. Perhaps most troubling about South Kotabato is the severe imbalance between inmates and staff. With approximately 2,000 prisoners overseen by just 20 guards, control within the facility has been effectively delegated to the prisoners themselves. The jail's nighttime conditions represent perhaps the most extreme suffering. For 12 hours, from approximately 5 p.m. to 5 a.m., inmates are locked in cells with no access to food, water, or medical attention. South Cotabato's extreme conditions stem in large part from President Rodrigo Duterte's war on drugs, which led to mass mass arrests without a corresponding expansion of the country's judicial capacity. The resulting backlog has created a situation where inmates might wait years or even decades for a trial. South Kotabato Provincial Jail represents a humanitarian crisis born of policy decisions, judicial backlogs, and infrastructure limitations. The result is conditions that violate fundamental human rights and place it firmly among the world's most inhumane detention facilities. Yet its brutal treatment of prisoners is not to be compared with Diarbakir Prison, Turkey. In the predominantly Kurdish southeastern region of Turkey stands a facility infamous for its role in the systematic abuse of political prisoners. Diarbakir Prison, established in 1980 following a military coup, gained international notoriety for torture and human rights violations so severe that it became known as Hell by those who survived its walls. What distinguishes Diarbakir from other facilities is the systematic nature of its abuses, particularly targeting Kurdish prisoners. Following the 1980 coup, the prison became central to Turkey's efforts to suppress Kurdish identity and political movements, with torture employed as a matter of policy rather than exception. According to Security Journal UK, Diarbakir ranks as the third most dangerous prison globally. The facility became notorious for specific torture methods that included forcing prisoners to drink sewage water, suspending them by their arms, subjecting them to electric shocks, and even training dogs to attack inmates' genitals. The prison's reputation was built during the 1980s and 1990s, when it housed primarily Kurdish political prisoners and activists. During this period, over 30 prisoners died from torture, with hundreds more suffering permanent physical and psychological damage. Survivors report that cells designed for 35 inmates routinely held more than 90 prisoners, creating conditions where prisoners were forced to sleep in shifts due to lack of space. Sanitation was virtually non-existent, with overflowing toilets and limited access to clean water. Medical care at Diarbakir was intentionally withheld as a form of punishment. Prisoners with serious injuries from torture or beatings were denied treatment, leading to infections, permanent disabilities, and death. This deliberate medical neglect formed part of the prison's systematic approach to breaking prisoners physically and mentally. The psychological dimension of Diyarbakir's regime was carefully calculated. Prisoners were forced to sing Turkish nationalist songs, recite nationalist pledges, and were punished for speaking Kurdish. These measures aimed to erase Kurdish identity and culture, adding cultural and psychological torture to physical abuse. Hunger strikes and death fasts became common forms of resistance among Diyarbakir's prisoners. Between 1982 and 1983, four prominent Kurdish activists, Kemal Pir, Mehmet Hayri Durmus, Akif Yilmaz, and Ali Sicek, died during a hunger strike protesting prison conditions, becoming martyrs in the Kurdish resistance movement. While conditions at Diarbakir have improved somewhat since the height of abuses in the 1980s and 1990s, human rights organizations continue to document concerns. The prison remains a potent symbol of state repression, with its legacy influencing Kurdish political consciousness and Turkish-Kurdish relations to this day. In 2019, Turkish authorities announced plans to convert part of Diarbakir prison into a museum, acknowledging its historical significance. However, critics have questioned whether this move represents genuine accountability or an attempt to sanitize the prison's dark history. While Diarbakir was being considered for reformation, this other prison was getting famous for its notoriety. Gitarama Prison, Muhanga Correctional Facility, Rwanda. In the aftermath of Rwanda's devastating 1994 genocide, a facility in the central region of the country became synonymous with a new level of human suffering. Gitarama Prison, now officially known as Muhanga Correctional Facility, earned international notoriety for conditions so extreme that they defied comprehension. What made Gitarama uniquely horrific was the unprecedented level of overcrowding combined with the complete collapse of infrastructure following the genocide. At its peak, the prison, built for 400 inmates, held more than 7,000 prisoners, most accused of participation in the genocide that claimed approximately 800,000 lives. The physical conditions within Gitarama during this period represented perhaps the most extreme overcrowding ever documented in a modern prison facility. Space was so limited that prisoners could not sit down simultaneously. Many were forced to stand for days or weeks, leading to a condition called Gitarama standing, where inmates' legs swelled to the point that skin burst open. Sanitation was non-existent, with human waste accumulating on the floors where prisoners stood. This created an environment where disease spread rapidly, with dysentery, cholera, and tuberculosis becoming rampant. The combination of standing and human waste and inadequate nutrition led to gangrene and foot rot, with many prisoners requiring amputations. Food and water were severely rationed, with inmates receiving barely enough to survive. Medical care was virtually non-existent, leading to a staggering death rate. By some estimates, between 20 and 30 prisoners died daily during the worst period, their bodies often remaining among the living for days before removal was possible. While While conditions at Muhanga have improved significantly since the immediate post-genocide period, the facility remains severely overcrowded and under-resourced. The prison continues to house many inmates convicted of genocide-related crimes, creating a complex dynamic where victims and perpetrators of one of history's worst atrocities coexist in close proximity. What distinguishes Gitarama Muhanga from other facilities on this list is how quickly human dignity collapsed under extreme circumstances. The prison represents how a humanitarian crisis, combined with a justice system overwhelmed by mass atrocity, can create conditions of suffering beyond what might be deliberately designed. Today, Muhanga serves as both a working prison and a grim reminder of Rwanda's darkest chapter. While conditions have improved in Gitarama Prison, it is still among the world's most inhumane detention facilities, just like the infamous walls of ADX Florence, United States. In the remote high desert of Colorado stands a facility designed to house those, the United States. Government considers its most dangerous or high-profile offenders. The United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility, known as ADX Florence, represents a different kind of inhumanity, one born not of overcrowding or physical abuse, but of extreme isolation and sensory deprivation. What distinguishes ADX Florence from other facilities is its architectural and operational focus on completely controlling prisoners' environments. Often called the Alcatraz of the Rockies, it was designed specifically to house prisoners requiring the highest level of security, including terrorist leaders, cartel bosses, and inmates who committed serious offenses in other prisons. The physical design of ADX Florence reflects its singular purpose: isolation. Each 7 by 12-foot concrete cell contains a concrete bed, desk, and stool, as well as a combination toilet and sink. All furniture is immovable, constructed of poured concrete. A shower that automatically shuts off on a timer is built into each cell, eliminating the need for prisoners to leave their cells for personal hygiene. Perhaps most notable is the extreme sensory deprivation. Cells have 4-inch wide windows that provide only a narrow view of the sky, preventing inmates from knowing their location within the prison. Cell doors are solid steel, not bars, with a small slot for passing food trays. Communication between cells is virtually impossible by design. The isolation regime at ADX Florence is unrelenting. Inmates spend approximately 23 hours per day in solitary confinement, with just 1 hour for exercise in a small private concrete pit, often described as an empty swimming pool. Even during this exercise period, inmates remain alone, with no human contact. This extreme isolation has profound psychological effects. Former ADX Florence warden Robert Hood described the facility as a clean version of hell, acknowledging the mental toll of such complete isolation. Mental health experts have consistently raised concerns about the psychological impact of long-term solitary confinement, with many arguing it constitutes a form of torture. Legal challenges to ADX conditions have been numerous. In 2012, a lawsuit was filed alleging that mentally ill prisoners were denied adequate treatment, leading to self-harm and suicide attempts. The suit was eventually settled, with the Bureau of Prisons agreeing to improve mental health services and to screen out prisoners with serious mental illness. Despite these challenges, ADX Florence continues to operate largely as designed, housing approximately 400 of America's most high-profile or dangerous federal prisoners, including international terrorists, cartel leaders, white supremacist gang leaders, and inmates who killed guards or other prisoners while incarcerated elsewhere. What places ADX Florence among the world's most inhumane prisons is not physical abuse or overcrowding, but the deliberate use of extreme isolation as a long-term containment strategy. While the facility is clean, climate-controlled, and provides adequate food and medical care, the psychological impact of years or decades of near-total isolation represents a different form of inhumanity, one increasingly recognized by human rights organizations and mental health experts as potentially constituting cruel and unusual punishment. If you love this video, then click on the card showing on your screen for more videos like this.